But first, the protests in Belarus calling for President Alexander Lukashenko to stand down. He's sometimes referred to as Europe's last dictator, and he's not taking these protests kindly. The response has been fierce. Video showing the use of force by police has been widely shared, and journalists too have been caught up in the crackdown. Elizaveta Vereykina of BBC Russian has been filming in the streets of Minsk for 3 weeks. She's now back at her base in Moscow and joins us. Dobro Pajalovit. Welcome to the program, Lisa.
Hello, hi.
Welcome. This was your first time in Belarus. What were your first impressions?
Well, the first impressions were that it's kind of Russia, but not really, because you feel that there are a lot of similarities, but at the same time there are differences, like the language is slightly different, like with some different endings, or there is A instead of O in some words. Also, you get a sense that this country has been preserved a bit more in this kind of a Soviet cocoon a little bit. So you can see some big Soviet symbols right in the airport, like a red star and this wreath of fire. Also, the airport itself is not that huge and big how we get used it to be here in Moscow or in some Western countries.
And when you arrive, does it kind of feel quiet? I mean, sort of alluding to that Soviet cocoon, does it feel quiet when compared to Moscow, when you arrive in Moscow?
Yes, it felt quiet, and also in terms of the protests. We arrived in the middle of the week, and those were the days after actually the bloodiest protests that went few days before that, and it felt like it's quiet, and it felt that probably people are really scared now, and the journalists who have been covering it before us, you could see their faces were quite exhausted, and people also thought, okay, probably now people won't, not many people will go out on the streets, and what's going to happen then? And it felt like a dead end. It was quiet, but actually the first Sunday we covered, we again saw hundreds, thousands of people on the main square. So that was the first impressions.
And that was peaceful. It was a peaceful atmosphere, an atmosphere of sort of carnival in some ways, those first protests that you covered.
Yes, I mean, in general, all these hundreds, thousands of people who go out onto the streets of Belarus, they are very peaceful people, and you can see women wearing flowers in their heads, on their hair, and there are people with children, families, men, women, or elderly people. So all sorts of just you can see just normal people go out, and they want to express their opinion, and they want fair elections. They demand Lukashenko to resign. They want to all those violent beatings of people by police to be investigated. You can see some workers on a strike there joining some crowds of people as well. So very peaceful. They smile, and some people even criticize them. Why are you smiling to the policemen who were beating you a few days ago? So, but they still smile.
So take us a bit more behind the scenes as a camera woman in this case. Were people happy to talk to your team? Were people happy to talk to journalists? I mean, give their names and and be open, or were they silent?
I had a different experience. So we once we even heard in the crowd people were chanting, "Thanks to journalists, thanks to journalists." So they knew that it's important for the world to see what's really going on in Belarus, but at the same time, sometimes people were actually scared to say their names, or didn't really want to talk in the crowd. When I asked to students when they were protesting, and I asked them, "What are your names?" and they said, "We don't want to say." And then I asked, "Why are you protesting?" and they said that we want to live in a country where you are not scared to tell your name.
Mm. And those were students. So tell us what happened then at the student protest on 1st September, because this was quite dramatic. It started very peacefully but ended in violence. What happened?
Yes, like all the protests are very peaceful there, but it was 1st of September, the first day when students and school children go to the schools and universities. But on that day, people were calling for the national strike, so to say, and specifically the students were calling for the strike. So they were calling not to go to the lessons, instead of to go to the streets and march and demand. Um, and On that day, we were walking with a group of students who were wearing this white red flag, and they also had some shields, like, papers, and on them written asking Lukashenko to resign or asking to stop the violence. And on that day, it was like a cat and mouse game with the police, because once the group of students marches along one street, police sees that they are on that street and immediately blocks the road. So the students see that the road is blocked, and they immediately turn to the left or to the right to the other boulevard or another street. So it was cat and mouse, basically for hours in the evening. But the longer it went, the less crowd of students was becoming. Some people just were tired of walking, or maybe they thought it's enough of protest for today for them. And when the crowd of students really became not that big, suddenly 2 buses of police, people in masks and uniform, suddenly stopped in front of them. Like dozens of policemen ran out of these buses and started grabbing students. Students tried to disperse, run away, but they were catching them, especially those who, for example, fell down on the ground. So it was a very dramatic scene, and then the police was dragging them into the buses, and they were driven away into custody.
One of the phrases that I see come up quite a lot of time in the reports from Belarus is the protesters thrown into police vans. The word "thrown." Now, at first, I take that as, okay, that's a sort of dramatic language. It means bundled in. But it is. People are literally being thrown into the vans, right?
Yeah, for example, I saw how the student, I spoke to him just a few minutes ago, and then in a few minutes, suddenly the police grabbed him. And there were like maybe 3 people. He was trying to resist, and 3 police men were still holding him and dragging him, because he was resisting and he wasn't walking with them, but they were dragging him like he was like a bag, and forcefully getting him into the car.
So people must have got a lot of bruises, maybe broken bones as well.
Yes, I haven't witnessed the most violent phase, or when police was beating people till their bodies were basically all blue, or when some people were shot with rubber bullets. But from what I witnessed and how people were detained, I imagine they definitely had some bruises.
And what about journalists then, and your team? I mean, can a journalist stay clean, avoid bruises in reporting events like these?
You can't avoid anything. So we always said that you can expect anything happening, but I haven't been physically assaulted. I was only asked to turn my camera multiple times, and I was threatened with detention, that they will detain me, though I kept on filming anyway.
They stopped filming with your camera. I saw some footage of you where you were filming, and the police insisted that you stopped filming, but you carried on.
Yes.
Were you not afraid?
I was, of course, but at some point you get this adrenaline, and also when you see people, just peaceful protesters, being detained, or a woman dragged by her hair, you just film, because you think that the world should know about that.
These detentions, were you detained yourself?
I was detained at one day. It was actually the day when almost all international journalists were suddenly detained. Usually they don't really they don't really pay much attention specifically to the journalists, but that was specifically the day. Probably, I don't know, there was a special order then. Basically, all journalists I knew were detained. Our team was detained. All our team. Some people in just civil clothes with masks on their head just came over to me while I was filming actually yet another detentions on the Independence Square. They just come to you and say, okay, now you go with us. I'm like, why? I'm an accredited journalist. No, we go for document check. I say, I can show you my accreditation now. No, you go with us. So they gathered us in the bus that we were driven into the local police station. Then we were there around 2 hours when they were checking our documents, passports. Then we were released when Russian consulate representative came over. They also were separating people by their passports.
But did they ever seize your camera, or did you have discs deleted, for example?
Luckily, not actually, but based on what other journalists told me, some journalists were asked to show what they filmed, were asked to delete, or they were searched. They were even asked to show their latest photos on their iPhones. Luckily, I wasn't asked to do something like that. But you always are prepared that something like that will happen.
You spoke earlier about the nature of the protest, women and flowers. Some people have called it flower power too. And there have been some extraordinary scenes. I saw 3 women hugging a serious-looking police in arms, like they were trying to disarm him with affection rather than hostility. What about you? What scenes have really stood out for you in the 3 weeks that you were filming?
Yes, I must say that actually in general, women are very active in the protests there. There are specific, for example, women marches that go, like there was a student march, but there were also multiple women marching, when only women gather with the flowers and just go along the streets with their demands. And it looks, for the police in some way, I had a feeling it looks a bit embarrassing, because from one side, police has to be this kind of a strong policeman with these masks and with all this I don't know, some weapons or any tools they have with them, with all these buses, scary buses where they drag people into. But then you see a crowd of women, young women of different ages, marching with smiles and also having still those strong and definite demands. They demand to Lukashenko to resign. They demand to stop violence. So they look, these women, gentle but strong at the same time.
And that's been a feature. I mean, I'll be brief because we are almost out of time, but that's been a feature of this protest. I've noticed that in a lot of your footage, it's always women. It's always a lot of women. And I wondered, was that a deliberate choice? Did your team try to focus on the Belarusian women in the protest? Or is it because of the nature of the protest, because the men are bundled away? Just briefly, if you don't mind.
Well, I mean, it's just in general that the whole, a lot of people in the society, just they're very together with one goal, And yes, that's also the fact that women are not, I mean, some women were detained, but some were not that brutally beaten as a man could be. So some women actually helped to rescue men. So, and in general, also the opposition leaders are also female.
Women.
So.
Yeah, women flying the flag of these protests in Belarus. Thank you very much, Elizaveta. Elizaveta Vereykina of BBC Russian, the woman behind much of the recent BBC video footage from the streets of the Belarus capital, Minsk. Now, this is the 5th floor, and they say a picture is worth...